Welcome to The Explainer. I'm so thrilled to have you here today because, well, we're tackling a truly fascinating philosophical contradiction. If you're someone who loves to optimize your financial life, you've almost certainly run into two entirely different frameworks for how we ought to approach work and wealth. On one hand, we've got ancient foundational religious texts, and on the other, we have modern, hyper-efficient financial strategies. So today, we're putting these two worlds on a collision course to see exactly what happens when we examine the concept of modern wealth building through a very ancient lens.
Okay, let's dive right into this. First up, we have the traditional interpretation of the biblical fall. It's that ancient mandate telling us survival requires the sweat of your brow. It's the ultimate work-to-live model, right? But now contrast that sharply with Robert Kiyosaki, the famous author of Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Kiyosaki heavily champions the idea of passive income. He famously argues that if your business requires your daily physical presence, well, you don't really own a business, you just own a job. The entire goal in his model is to build a system that pays you while you sleep, effectively letting you escape the rat race. That's a pretty sharp, distinct tension, isn't it? Sweating for your daily bread versus letting a system do the sweating for you?
And that leads us directly to the central, burning question of this entire explainer: does passive income actually contradict the Bible? Think about it. If the biblical text says we literally must work to eat, is the modern pursuit of passive income, of not having to trade your time directly for a paycheck, somehow violating that ancient principle? Is it an accurate reading to say that generating wealth without hourly labor is, wrong?
Well, to find out, we're going to objectively break down this apparent contradiction step by step. Here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the passive income paradox itself. Second, the biblical context of work. Third, redefining the passive system. Fourth, a side-by-side comparison. And finally, we'll wrap up with stewardship versus idleness. Let's get into it.
Starting off with Section 1, the passive income paradox, and the core conflict at play here.
Let's look at this incredibly striking verse from 2 Thessalonians 3:10. It says, "If a man will not work, he shall not eat." I mean, that establishes a very strict, uncompromising baseline. The text is offering a stern warning against slothfulness and the explicit refusal to put in effort. And from a surface-level reading, you can easily see why someone might look at a modern real estate investor kicking back on a beach while the rent checks roll in and think, wait a minute, that doesn't look like work at all. Is that violating this rule?
Which brings us to Section 2, the biblical context of work. Taking a look at the Genesis account. This brilliantly illustrates the crucial distinction we need to make here. Before the fall of man, work already existed. Genesis 2:15 says man was placed in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it. So in the biblical framework, work itself is not a curse. It's actually inherent to human dignity. But now, jump over to Genesis 3, which details the consequences of the fall. Suddenly, it introduces painful toil, sweat, and those famous thorns and thistles. The absolute key theological principle here is that work didn't suddenly become bad. Rather, the nature of the work changed. Friction was introduced. Survival now required overcoming scarcity. Notice, it doesn't say you must exchange hours directly for wages. It just says wealth and sustenance are going to require effort and management.
Moving right along to Section 3, redefining the passive system through Kiyosaki's model. The reality we have to face is that passive isn't actually passive. It's a reallocation of labor. Let's take a concrete example, like building a real estate asset portfolio. Step 1 requires massive upfront capital and strategic labor. You're out there finding the property, securing the financing, fixing the place up, and carefully placing tenants. Then, Step 2 is risk management. You have to ensure you can actually survive economic downturns. And Step 3 is ongoing stewardship. Because let's be real, passive income streams are rarely totally hands-off. They require governance and smart capital allocation. So Kiyosaki's system isn't an absence of work at all. It is highly concentrated upfront effort specifically designed to create a self-sustaining asset. And if we map that ancient text onto the modern boardroom, we get a fascinating thematic translation. Those biblical thorns and thistles, that inherent friction in work we just talked about, they absolutely still exist for the modern business owner. They just look a little different today. The thorns and thistles of a passive real estate business are sudden market volatility, its late-night tenant plumbing emergencies, its inflation, and system inefficiencies. The friction of the fall is very much still there. The modern business owner is simply building systems to manage that friction at scale.
Let's put these head-to-head in Section 4, a side-by-side comparison of aligning the paradigms.
Now, what's really interesting about this matrix is seeing exactly where these two worldviews perfectly align and where they diverge. Let's walk through it together. Looking at the first dimension, the role of work. The Bible commands diligence. Kiyosaki commands highly concentrated strategic labor to build an asset. Our alignment analysis? They are fully aligned. Both recognize that assets do not magically appear without effort. Passive income is simply the fruit of past labor. Moving down to the curse of toil, the Bible says survival requires overcoming friction. Kiyosaki says investing requires mitigating market risks. Once again, they're aligned. The friction is identical, just modernized. But look at that bottom row, the goal of wealth. The biblical paradigm views wealth as provision for family, charity, and ongoing stewardship. Kiyosaki's model often frames it as financial freedom, autonomy, and escaping the rat race. Here, the alignment is totally conditional. It aligns perfectly if that financial freedom is actively used for productive stewardship, but it entirely contradicts the biblical text if the ultimate goal is just absolute idleness.
And that leads us perfectly into our final section, Section 5, Stewardship versus Idleness, and our final verdict.
The ultimate differentiator derived from our source material relies entirely on how we define these two terms. Stewardship is the wise allocation of capital and the active management of systems to generate returns. Idleness, on the flip side, is pursuing wealth solely to escape any societal contribution or to just live a life of total indulgence. From a professional, objective standpoint, passive income does not violate the biblical text because managing an asset passively is biblical stewardship. But pursuing passive income solely so you can check out and contribute absolutely nothing to the world around you, well, that shifts right into the category of condemned sloth.
If you need a definitive proof of concept for this, look no further than the parable of the talents in Matthew 25. In this famous story, a master provides upfront capital to his servants. Those individuals allocate that capital to work, and returns are generated, notably, without the master's direct daily labor. When the master returns, he doesn't condemn them for not working for an hourly wage. No, he actually praises them for their wise asset management. This proves that generating returns on deployed capital without daily, physically exhausting labor is an ancient, biblically praised concept of stewardship. It is definitely not a modern invention of sloth. Kiyosaki's model merely changes how one works, moving from operating a job to managing an asset.
So the absolutely crucial takeaway is this: the tension between the ancient text and modern wealth building isn't about the mechanics of the income at all. It's about the condition of the heart behind it. Which leaves us with this final provocative question as we wrap up today's explainer. Look at your own goals, your own portfolio, your own ambition to escape the rat race. Are you building wealth to fund your idleness or to expand your stewardship? Think on that. Thank you so much for exploring this with me today, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.